Thanks for joining us here on CTV News Channel. I'm Renee Rogers. We begin with breaking news we're following. U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, has canceled a planned speaking appearance in Ottawa as he has been called back to Washington. This news comes just over 1 hour before Hoekstra was scheduled to be a featured speaker at the 2026 Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference in Ottawa. Organizers say he was called back to D.C. for urgent meetings.
Pete Hoekstra was supposed to speak at the 2026 Canada Strong and Free Conference in Ottawa. Organizers suddenly learned he would not be coming. The United States ambassador to Canada was called back to Washington for urgent meetings. This was not a normal trip. It happened at the exact same time U.S. courts were blocking Trump's tariff plans. The CUSMA trade talks were getting close to an important July 1st deadline, and the White House had gone strangely quiet about the court decisions. Ambassadors travel between capitals. That is part of the job. But ambassadors do not cancel high-profile public speaking appearances on less than 1 hour's notice for routine meetings. The word organizers used when explaining the cancellation was urgent. That framing matters because it is the organizers' own characterization of what they were told, not editorial interpretation, not political commentary, but the explanation provided to the people who had to announce to conference attendees that the featured American speaker would not be present. The legal context surrounding the timing is specific and documented. Major Trump tariffs have been deemed unconstitutional or illegal by American courts, severely limiting the White House's leverage. The tariff authorities used to apply broad measures on Canadian goods, including the IEEPA authorities deployed for additional pressure, have been challenged through the American judicial system and found in multiple rulings to exceed the executive branch's statutory powers. Appeals are ongoing. But while those appeals proceed, the legal foundation of the coercive posture that defined 18 months of Canada-US relations has been significantly weakened. The administration's primary weapon, the credible threat of escalating tariff pressure, now carries a judicial asterisk that every government watching this dispute is factoring into its own calculations. Political analysts following the bilateral relationship describe the administration's current position in precise terms. The White House is now desperately looking for leverage, not looking for leverage, desperately looking for leverage. That is the assessment of the same administration that characterized Canada as an economy that would inevitably fold under sustained economic pressure. The same administration whose officials publicly mocked Canadian resistance. The same administration that launched the tariff strategy with the explicit expectation that Ottawa would be forced into concessions within months. The trap this administration created for itself has become fully visible. The strategy had exactly two viable outcomes. Either Canada capitulated, which would have validated the approach and delivered the concessions the administration wanted, or Canada did not capitulate, forcing the administration to choose between escalation and backing down. Canada did not capitulate. Escalation carries compounding costs, more international resistance, more legal challenges, more domestic economic damage as American consumers absorb the price increases that 18 months of tariff disruption have already produced. Backing down after 12 months of aggressive public rhetoric about American dominance and Canadian weakness produces a different and equally damaging cost, an explicit public acknowledgement that the strategy failed, the leverage was overstated, and the country described as dependent and easily pressured is still standing. Three simultaneous crises are converging on the administration at precisely this moment. The first is legal courts stripping away the tariff powers that form the operational foundation of the coercive approach. The second is diplomatic countries that were supposed to fear American economic pressure are no longer automatically surrendering to it. Germany's chancellor called the U.S. negotiating position in the Iran talks unconvincing in a public address to college students. The EU has mapped American supply chain vulnerabilities across hundreds of product categories. Mexico launched its largest ever trade mission to Canada in May 2026, rather than seeking separate bilateral accommodation with Washington. The third crisis is political approval ratings continuing to weaken as economic uncertainty grows and the midterm elections approach. Each crisis would be manageable individually. All three arriving simultaneously, with the CUSMA deadline weeks away, constitutes a categorically different problem. The White House's silence following the tariff rulings is the detail that carries the most analytical weight. The normal pattern when the administration faces a legal or political setback is immediate, aggressive public response, a social media post, a press conference statement, a public characterization of the ruling as wrong or politically motivated or subject to reversal on appeal. That response did not come following the most recent tariff rulings. Silence from an administration defined by its loudness in response to something that would normally produce instant reaction signals internal disarray rather than strategic patience. It suggests the urgent meetings that recalled Hoekstra from Ottawa were precisely what the word urgent implies: an administration attempting to determine what its position actually is, not an administration confidently executing a prepared response. Canada's role in producing this moment deserves examination because it is consistently underrepresented in American coverage of the bilateral conflict. The trade war strategy was constructed on a specific behavioral model. Apply pressure, generate fear, wait for the target economy to calculate that concession costs less than sustained conflict, receive the concession. That model has worked in other bilateral contexts at various points. With Canada under Carney, it produced the opposite of the intended result. Canada pushed back publicly and consistently from the first day of the conflict. The retaliatory tariff list was calibrated specifically against American political constituencies: bourbon from Kentucky, steel from Pennsylvania, manufactured goods from states whose senators and representatives the administration needed for its domestic legislative agenda. The diplomatic response was deliberately internationalized formal CUSMA violation statements, naming specific breached articles, bilateral engagement with European leaders about the shared challenge of American unpredictability, the historic Armenia Summit appearance as the first non-European leader at the European political community, the Canada Strong Fund, the $5 billion Trade Diversification Corridors Fund, the Arctic Infrastructure Fund, the Pacific LNG Infrastructure, the Antwerp-Bruges Port Agreement, the Hanwha Defense Partnership. Every structural move Canada made reinforced the same message: this is not a bilateral dispute that Ottawa will quietly settle. It is a documented breach of a signed agreement by an administration whose reliability cannot be assumed, and the appropriate response is to build alternatives while holding the line on the violations. That posture changed the political calculus for American domestic actors in ways the administration did not anticipate. Senators from Michigan acknowledged publicly on Canadian television that their state's auto industry was suffering from the tariffs. American agricultural lobbies documented what Canadian potash dependence means if the relationship deteriorates further. American businesses operating integrated cross-border supply chains lobbied against the tariffs because those measures were raising their own input costs, not protecting their market positions. The domestic American pressure against the trade war strategy accumulated over 18 months precisely because Canada refused to fold, which meant the economic damage was being shared across both countries simultaneously. America's genuine strategic advantage in its relationship with Canada was never coercive power.